We are studying the book of Mark, and we have finished up chapter 14 on Wednesday evening. And so I want to take a look, if you have your question sheets, I want to take a look at those real quick here, and then we'll move from those and start taking a look at chapter 15 as we're in these last hours leading up to the crucifixion of Jesus. And we've been walking that path with Him, and He's now been with the high priest, and dealing with that mockery of a trial that they kind of put Him through. We've seen Peter's denial that Jesus had prophesied, and we're about to continue the process in Mark's record in relationship to that history. But I do want to take a look at the questions with you that we handed out, because it's been a little while since we've done any of those, because we've been on Mark chapter 15 or 14 for a little while. Just bear with me for fur. My mom always says it's not fur, Brian. It's not fur. It's for. All right. So if anybody need a copy, I printed these just in case somebody needed a copy of the questions, and then I forgot to stick them in the bin back there. But if you don't have a copy, pass a couple of those down, Deborah. I'll send it to you. I'm going to show it to you on the screen too. So if you just want to look at it on the screen, that's good, just as well in some ways. And then I'll stick these. These have chapter 15 on them as well. If you don't have that, you can grab that on your way out this morning. But in chapter 14, what's being plotted, and that sounds like a strange way to ask that, but what's being plotted and who's plotting it? All right, so the death of Jesus, the crucifixion of Jesus being plotted, who's involved, basically? Okay, the chief among the Jews and Judas. Okay, that's the other piece of that plot, if you will, that I wanted us to see. Those chief rulers and leaders among the Jews, Judas had gone to them actually, right? And it approached them and said, hey, I've got a way, and works out an arrangement with them that he might betray Jesus and turn him over into their hands. And Judas is he's hard to figure out a little bit, because we know there's the greed side of him, right? There's other texts and narratives that help us appreciate that he was carrying the treasury with them and that he was stealing from it. And so you have that greed side of Judas that kind of creates issues for him. Somebody asked me, did Judas really think they would crucify Jesus when he was betraying him? Or did he have maybe a thought that wouldn't get that far? Is that why he's penitent later when he realizes the magnitude of what had occurred? And the truth is, I don't have any record to know, you know what I mean? I don't have any verbatim kind of text that I can go to and say, well, this is really what was on the mind of Judas. But certainly his reaction after the end result of his action shows that there was at least a level of remorse for what he had done. And whether or not he understood or knew, or maybe in the moment just kind of turned a blind eye to what was really going to happen with Jesus. But he's involved, and he's certainly culpable for that pressing forward. What happens at the house of Simon the leper? Yeah, that's where Jesus had been anointed with oil. And what was their reaction? Yeah, that could have been sold and given to whom? It could have been sold and given to the poor. And what was Jesus' reaction? Yeah, he said, the poor you'll have with you always. And he's not saying don't help the poor. He's saying those opportunities will always be around. This is the only moment in some senses that you can aid and assist me as I'm leading up to the crucifixion that I'm going to suffer. And so it's not necessarily a matter of don't do one thing and don't do the other. It's a matter of knowing in what order sometimes things have to be done. Who takes the initial betrayal steps? Judas. And I just wanted to illustrate that. You know, he goes to them. They want to accomplish it, but they know there's too much popularity among Jesus, among those in Jerusalem, and so they're going to have to find some other way. And so they come in the cover of night. They get a betrayer to tell them where he's going to be. And so Judas becomes the integral part of that. What feast are Jesus and his disciples honoring? That's Passover, right? He's going to become, in some senses, the final Paschal or Passover lamb to take away the sins of the world. What information saddens his disciples? Yeah, that there's a betrayal. And what's their reaction? Yeah, is it I? Is it I? Lord, is it I? Each one comes and asks it. What is instituted during this feast? Well, we often call the Lord's Supper, or maybe a better way to just think of it is the memorial that Jesus establishes for himself, to remember his body that would be broken and his blood that he would shed for our behalf. What is told concerning Peter? Yeah. You're going to deny me, and what's his reaction? Yeah, it's interesting. He denies the denial. He denies what it is that Jesus is telling him is going to happen, but ultimately we learn in this very text that he actually does that. Describe what Jesus does in the garden. Okay, he prays that, and he prays for what? Yeah, let this cup pass from me, but not my will, but thine be done. Who's with him? That's a trick question, by the way, a little bit. Okay, yeah, all the disciples come to the garden. Then Jesus takes Peter, James, and John, and he goes a little further with them, and he sits them in a location. Then he goes about a stone's throw away from them. And so you've kind of got them parted in kind of three different zones, if you will. Not necessarily a great distance between them, but Peter, James, and John are the immediate ones that they come. He keeps coming back after each time he prays, and he finds them what? Asleep. And he warns them the first time. Then he comes back the second time, and he gets a little bit firm with them. And he comes back the third time, and he said what? Sleep on, right? The opportunities to have appreciated this moment have passed. Yeah. To my knowledge, that would have occurred. That's John 17, right? And then you have this scene in John 18. So John, in his own chronology, would probably put it before. Yeah, chronology's hard because each writer sometimes each writer is telling the story, and each writer is not giving every detail. And so if you try to affix certain, did this happen before this or did that happen before that? That's hard sometimes because you can somewhat piece it together, but you can't always, because some of the writers are just kind of relaying their inspired thoughts concerning the events that they want to record as it relates to those things. How did his captors know who he was? A kiss, that's right. And what did one of his disciples do in response to the threat? Yeah. And we know from other texts that was Peter, and the servant was Malchus. It doesn't record that for us. All four, remember we did that, kind of went through all that one Wednesday night, and we outlined kind of all of the history up to that point and looked at all four gospel accounts. And so all of them record Peter cutting the ear off of the servant. Only one records for us who it was that was involved. And not only did they know him because of the kiss, but why else? Jesus said, I am. They come saying, and he says, I am he. I am he. And it's interesting, one other question that kind of came out of that after our class on Wednesday was when that happened, when Jesus said, I am he, what did they do? Yeah, they drew back, and other narratives say they even fell to the ground. And a great question that I didn't talk about Wednesday night was, why? If they've come to arrest Jesus, and why the reaction that would have them backpedaling and falling to the ground? Now, there's no narrative within that text that tells us why. So there's not to my knowledge, there's no statement or sentence that says, and here is why they fell. You could come up with your own thought processes in some ways about that. Certainly they were familiar with what about Jesus in terms of the things he'd been doing. Yeah, his power and the miracles that he had been doing, right? These servants, remember, these servants are basically the Jewish military, right? And what does military do? They follow They follow orders. And it doesn't necessarily mean that these men that have come here have any real personal vengeance or challenge against Jesus. They're following an order that's coming from the leadership. And if they're familiar with the miracles and the power that Jesus has demonstrated, and they've come asking, and generally, if you're hunting down a man who knows he's going to be put to death if you find him, what's his normal reaction going to be? Yeah. Either he's going to try to fight, or he might have people around him say, "Oh, he left hours ago," right? There's going to be some mechanism by which to try to keep some safety for him. I don't figure it was very often that they had people that they were seeking that just stepped up and said, "I am he." And then you add their knowledge of the power that he has. Not highly unlikely, or not. It's highly likely that's right. That's not really the right way I want to say that either. But it's quite a possibility for them to have stepped back and just sheer, what's he going to do? They've witnessed his power. What's he going to do? But we don't have any specific answers to why they did that, just that they did. So what did his disciples do when they took Jesus away? Yeah, the text says they fled. We do know that two of them, they flee the garden scene, but two of them are kind of willing to at least get in somewhat proximity. Who are they? John and Peter. Okay, John and Peter kind of find them ways. John's got some influence that he's able to use to kind of get him in proximity. When you read other narratives, Peter gets close enough that he's going to be at least within eye distance of Jesus after his denial. And but in the garden scene, when there's an imminent threat, they all flee that scene. What unusual event does Mark record for us? Yeah, the man come out and had just kind of a sheet, for lack of a better description, around him. And when the threat came towards him, he runs off naked, the text says, in fear of what was going on. And we talked a little bit about that Wednesday as to whether we could figure out exactly who that was. There's some ideas, but no 100% evidence that would help us there. Where did they take Jesus? Yeah, home, right? And what did some rise up and do against Jesus? Yeah, false witnesses, right? They and the fact that the Sanhedrin's basically begging people, bring us something. We'd like to charge this guy. Courts usually don't work that way, right? In fact, generally not very fair idea that a judge decides, well, listen, I don't have enough against this fellow, but I want to accuse him of something. So the judges are calling for witnesses. Anybody, you got something, bring it. And let's bring it to against him. Did Jesus respond? No, not initially, right? And ultimately, he'll make simple statements in relationship. But what did the finally ask him? Are you or not? And what did Jesus say? Yeah, basically, I am. Yeah, and that was enough for the high priest, right? What did he say? That's blasphemy. That's enough. That's enough for me. Send the witnesses away. I don't care about witnesses anymore. That statement alone is enough for me. Let's be done with this. Blasphemy is the charge. And what predicted event occurs then at the end of the chapter? Yeah, Peter's denial, right? Jesus had predicted it, and it actually is fulfilled there at the end of the chapter. Any leftover questions about chapter 14? All right, let's take a look then at chapter 15. And again, remembering that Mark's account is the more abridged, concise version. So straightway in the morning, the chief priests, remember, so he's arrested at night. They have this mockery of a trial in the night, which was actually illegal under their own laws. And we listed some of those illegal nature of those things on Wednesday. But so in the morning, the chief priests held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council, and bound Jesus and carried him away and delivered him to Pilate. Now, you think a lot of things about this scene, but what a cowardly group, because they want Jesus to be put to death. They were willing to listen to false witnesses to get to that judgment. They're willing to accuse of blasphemy when all the evidences should have pointed them directly to the fact that he was exactly who he claimed to be. And now who are they running to do their dirty work, for lack of a better description? They're running to government. Okay? They're willing to do all these things that are completely egregious in relationship to their own laws and their own sets of standards. And yet then when it comes down to it, we don't want the accountability of this in their own minds. So let's go to the Romans, and a fellow by the name of Pilate happens to be governor over the region at the time. Who does he answer to? He answers to Rome. Okay? But he answers to Rome about keeping the what there in that region? About keeping the peace. And the manner in which he answers to Rome will affect his job. This is an appointment. Okay? They didn't elect him governor. He's appointed as governor over the region. And in order to keep that role, then he's got to keep Rome happy. And the way you keep Rome happy is basically two things. Keep the tax money flowing and keep the peace on the grounds. And keep insurrections and challenges that might come up that would threaten Roman rule in check. And so they bring him to Pilate. And Pilate asks him then, "Art thou the king of the Jews?" And he answering said unto them what? That thou sayest. And so that's not really an answer Pilate, I'm sure, was looking for. I'm sure he was looking for something a little more concrete than that. Something a little more definitive, at least yes or no. Because if Jesus says yes, then Pilate's now got grounds, right? I've got a man claiming to be a king in my region, and Rome is king in my region, and now I can deal with it. If he says no, then what can he do? If Jesus answers no to that question. Yeah, he says, well, see there, folks, he's not claiming anything. Why'd you guys bring him here? And he throws the Jews and Jesus out of his courtroom. But he didn't answer either way. Thou sayest. Thou sayest. And so that leaves Pilate in a predicament. Now he's got to figure out, okay, where do I go from here? A yes or no would have been a lot clearer, would have been a lot easier to try to address, but now I've got to dig a little deeper. So the chief priests speak up and accused him of many things, and all the while he's doing what? He's just standing there. Okay? One accusation after another accused him of many things, and he answers them nothing. No response. Again, is that common? No. I mean, if you're being charged in a way that you know that the people that brought you into the hands of Pilate, their end result is they want you to be put to death. Most people are pleading and begging and making their case and doing everything they can to avoid the consequence that's on the horizon. And so this is not common for one to be accused in this fashion and just simply remain silent. And yet it's part of what Jesus has been doing all along. What I appreciate, go back to the prayer now, the three prayers in the garden. Let this cup, the singularity of the cup encompassed the whole of everything he was going to have to do in order to suffer these things that we might find redemption in Him. And so Jesus basically says, not my will but thine be done. The whole thing, the whole cup, I'll drink it all if that's what's necessary. And so though there may have been moments, we're going to see another one if we get that far in our text today, there may be moments along the way where maybe Jesus could have just kind of circumvented this whole thing and kind of sped the process up. You think about it, He could have just said, yes, yeah, I'm a king. And that would have sped this process up, right? The end result probably would have been the same. But it would have circumvented in some senses the cup, the whole of everything He was going to experience in order to bring redemption to man. He doesn't shortcut any of it. He absorbs and lives in every single aspect of all the things that would occur to Him to bring redemption. And that's a powerful part of what Jesus does for us. I hope that we appreciate more than just kind of singular moments. but that he embraces it all when he had moments, even without miraculous ability, he had moments to maybe speed this process up or do some things or say some things that might have changed it. But he answered nothing. So Pilate asks again, verse 4, saying, "Answerest thou nothing?" You're accused of some pretty heavy things here. There have been lots of things that are brought against you and charged against you. Are you going to say nothing? Behold how many things they witness against thee. But Jesus still at that point yet answered nothing. And what's Pilate's reaction? He marvels at this. I don't know. Well, obviously, Pilate has never had a case like this ever brought before him. This is a completely unique set of circumstances that he has Jesus, the Son of God, in front of him. He doesn't know the whole picture. And yet, he's marveling at such a scene where one will not even try to defend themselves in the face of these challenges. Now again, Mark kind of fast forwards a little bit, but so Pilate gets a plan, right? What's Pilate's idea? Right, so it was common yearly at the Feast of Passover that he would release unto them one prisoner, whomsoever they desired. Now, generally, those would probably have been, history shows us, that those probably have been more political prisoners. People that spoke out in defense of Jewish power or Jewish leadership and spoke out and said things contrary to Rome. And those would be the ones generally that the audience would desire to have released back in. So generally, they would release not a threat to society, but most likely a political type prisoner whom the Jews might want to embrace back into their population. But Pilate gets a great idea. And by the way, I think it's a great idea too. I don't fault Pilate here. I think that under normal circumstances, I think his idea makes perfect sense. Let's put the biggest contrasting two individuals before him. Let's put the murderous Barabbas out here. And let's set him out here, and then let's set Jesus, and let this audience of people take a look at these two fellas and decide which one of them they feel safer having back among them. And so it's very clever. And so there was one named Barabbas, verse 7, which lay bound with them that had made insurrection with him, who had committed murder in the insurrection. And the multitude crying aloud began to desire him to do as he had ever done unto them. But Pilate answered them, saying, Will ye that I release unto you the King of the Jews? Is that really going to be your choice? Is that the decision that you're going to make? For he knew that the chief priests had delivered him for envy. What I appreciate about Pilate is he knows the motives here. He knows that Jesus didn't do anything worthy of having been brought before him. Pilate is fully aware that this is a pure case of envy from the chief priests who see a threat to their influence and power. And so they've decided that they're going to use the Roman system in order to remove out of their presence one who is a threat to them politically in their minds, one who is a threat to them from an influential standpoint in their minds, and one who is beginning to lead the people away from trusting the chief priests and rulers into looking at Jesus more closely. So Pilate knows the motives. And so in his mind, he's thinking there is no way that out of pure envy, that envy would overrule the idea that let a murderous man. But notice what they said. What did they shout out? Yeah, and notice, the multitude crying aloud began to desire him to do as he had ever done unto them. Right? We want him. At least release him. We don't care. We don't care. Pilate says, well, envy over murder? Where's the balance here? Where's the balance? Really? This is what you're looking for? But the chief priests moved the people that he should rather release Barabbas unto them. And Pilate answered and said again unto them, What will ye then that I shall do unto him whom ye call the King of the Jews? The plan would have been great if it had what? If it had worked. Pilate thought he had a perfect plan, right? I'll set these completely contrasting individuals. There's not a chance in the world that envy will overrule their good sense about releasing this murderer's Barabbas back into their population. And so surely. Well, now what's happened is the exact opposite. Pilate didn't have a plan what? He didn't have a plan B. He just assumed that there's no way they'll ask for Barabbas. They'll ask for Jesus about it, and I'll be done with this. But now that they've asked for Barabbas to be released, Pilate goes, now what? What do I do now? Because he didn't have a secondary. What do you want me to do with Jesus then? If you want me to release Barabbas. Yeah. Yeah. And you're right. It does see how do you go? The question is, how do you go from several days worth of Jesus coming in and even the Jews themselves knowing that he was popular enough that we can't touch him in the middle of the day. So how did we go from that just a day earlier and days leading up to that to now you've got a scene? And I don't know that we can give any great definitive answer to that, except for the fact that the picture changes. Up until this point, you have seen Jesus of Nazareth as nothing more than a humble man who comes in, has done great things, has performed many miracles, but now you see him charged in front of an audience. This is a highly poor illustration, but it's the best I can come up with. Think about the way you thought of O.J. Simpson. When he went from elite athlete, great sportsman, a man you saw potentially in movies and things like that, and in all the Hertz commercials and jumping through the airport, right? You had an image. But the moment you thought of him as a criminal and saw him in a courtroom, your mind what? It changed. It changed. You change the scenery, and your mindset about somebody can change. And you begin to think, well, maybe he is kind of a bad guy, right? And your mindset changes. That's the only thing I can come up with. That when they set him out there, right? And now you see him now as one who's been charged. He's in the in the hands of the Roman authorities. We went from coming in as Hosanna a few days earlier to now he's being charged, and the scene changes. And that can work on people's mindsets. Yeah. Yeah. We don't know the mechanics of it, but we do know from verse 11 that the chief priests were able to move the people towards this mindset. And so how they did that exactly, we may not know, but there was some mechanism in place where they were able to get into the people and begin to influence the way they were reacting to this scene. Yeah. And right. When Judas brings the 30 pieces of silver back to him, it's obvious they kind of want to say, no, we didn't. We're not responsible for this. Yeah. Yeah, and so there's hypocrisy in just about everything they do as it relates to Jesus. Yeah, which way do I go? Yeah. And I think that once you begin that process of kind of moving a crowd, and that's not as hard to do as you think sometimes. You can move a crowd pretty quickly that had no intentions of thinking in a certain direction, but you get enough influence among it, you can begin to sway it. And that's what's happening here, I believe. Not to my knowledge, not biblical. Yeah. 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 Well, and Mark, and again, Mark's given us the short version, so you could add that Pilate's wife, has the dream. You don't want anything to do with this man. You need to set him loose. And Pilate's got. I mean, you think about it. He's got Rome to answer to, because in the back of his mind, I'm sure he's thinking, if I don't fulfill what these chief priests and rulers want, then I may have the next insurrection on my hands, and Rome's going to send somebody else in here that can control this matter. And so that so his wife's pulling him one direction, his mind is pulling him in another direction as it relates to the chief priest. Now the mob of people are screaming at him about what he should do. It's a predicament. But had he just been just and right and done what he knew was right, but yet that wouldn't fulfill the plan of God either. So it's a lot of nuances. Yeah. Yeah. Right. There might see some personal evidence, and maybe some personal disappointment on the part of Pilate, because this may have been his way to just be done with Barabbas. He thought. Yeah. So then he asks again, "What will ye then that I shall do unto him whom ye call the King of the Jews?" And they've gone from shouting, "Release Barabbas," to now do what? Crucify him. Crucify him. It's just unimaginable how they have turned this audience of people into a frenzied mob that without hesitation, seemingly now. What shall I think about all the possible answers to that. What shall I do with Jesus? Well, release him too. Release him too. You know what I mean? There are all kinds of possibilities. And they have been so conditioned now by the chief rulers and chief priests that they begin to chant and cry out, "Crucify, crucify." That's an amazing imagery when you think about it. And to kind of get your mind around the idea of here's this audience, a large audience of people. And by the way, it's Passover, largest feast day on the calendar. And you've got Jews from where? All over the place. Meaning you've got some Jews, most likely, that did not have opportunity to what? Sorry, it's my phone. I've got to, it's trying to talk to me. It's off. I don't know why it's trying to do that. Sorry. I'm going to have to, it added a new feature the other day. I'm going to have to turn it clear off from now on, not just silence the phone part. So there's this moment where they have a chance to turn the tide, but they don't. Pilate says unto them again, verse 14, "Why? What evil have ye done?" And they cried out the more exceedingly, "Crucify him, crucify him." He's asking, what did he do wrong? And they're still chanting. And when he asks them, really, shouldn't I just release him? And they're shouting even louder now to crucify him. Go ahead, Jim. Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting scenario where he doesn't want to use his own authority. He's trying to use them when he had the authority just to do what he wanted to do in this circumstance. But again, he's trying to appease them. So Pilate, willing to content the people, released Barabbas unto them and delivered Jesus when he had scourged him to be crucified. And so Pilate basically just decided, this was the path I chose. And my hope was that Barabbas would be the one that they would have put to death and release Jesus. But they just refuse at this point. And any time he tries to turn that or change that, they become even angrier and angrier. Yeah. He may try to wash his hands symbolically and literally of this, but there's culpability, although there is some narrative, not in Mark's account, that though Pilate's accountable, there's a reference to the idea, though, that ultimately the Jews have a greater accountability in relationship to this. But he can't just say, well, sorry about that. He had the authority and the right and the power to do the right things as it relates to this. So the soldiers led him away into the hall called Praetorium. I believe that to be probably the predominant court that Pilate would have used. And he's had him scourged. He's led to be crucified. They lead him into the great hall called Praetorium. And they call together the whole band. So all of Pilate's soldiers and men, guards, if you will, that kind of serve at his leisure, have all been called together in and around Jesus. And they clothed him with purple and plaited a crown of thorns and put it about his head. And Joellen shared with me something Aaron had made. I wasn't sure whether I'd get to this today or not, but actually I will here at the end. But if you can imagine now, and I don't even know how Aaron made this without hurting himself, to be quite honest with you. But you can think about a crown of thorns that would be placed on Jesus' head. I have to be careful carrying it, let alone have that just shoved onto my head. In the pain and agony of that itself, and the mockery of it. A crown's generally made of what? Gold and jewels, and they fashion this and place this on his head, and it's a pretty sad scene that begins a process. Now he's already dealt with it among the Jews, right? He's already dealt with the stuff that they had done. Now he's going to be at the hands of the Romans, and there's no rules. The Jews had some rules that they were negating, some of them, but they had some rules about how much they could do, and not the Romans. When he gets scourged by the Romans, they don't have 40 stripes save one. That's a Jewish law. Romans could do whatever they wanted. And so it's a horrible scene when you think about it. All right, Lord willing, we'll come back then and begin the deeper we go, and to think again that Jesus willingly let them place this upon his head on our behalf. And again, we'll see that on Wednesday. Can you hand that to Gary? He's in charge of it. Thank you. Hi, guys.